Kicking off the list at number 5, Grandma's House. This first one is from Abby Kadabi and comes from Connecticut. My grandma's house has always, for as long as I can remember, been a scary place. Most of them are. My dad and aunt and uncle all grew up in the house and had paranormal experiences occur throughout their lives. One example was when my dad and uncle were teenagers, my uncle was walking down the steps and was swinging a towel, as he had just washed his hair. Out of nowhere, my dad, who was standing in the living room at the bottom of the stairs, saw the towel straighten out in front of my uncle as if someone pulled it, and my uncle fell forcefully down the stairs. Ooh! This is when I would quit personally, that would for sure. After I saw that towel fling up, I'd be out of there. Now, my grandma hates all things paranormal, especially Ouija boards. So it's a big no-no in our family to discuss the paranormal events that occur in her house. Around 8 years ago, my oldest brother moved into the basement of their house. One night when he was home alone, he woke up out of a deep sleep, having felt like he was shaken by somebody. He stood up and instantly smelled gas. So he went upstairs and outside of the house. Later, he found out there was a carbon monoxide leak, and if he hadn't woken up, there's a big chance he could have died in his sleep. So months after that, when my grandparents were away for the weekend, the family decided to try a ghost radar app in their house. I guess that's a good solution other than a Ouija board, just a radar. We'll see. We all sat around the phone and my uncle asked the normal questions, like is anyone here, what's going on, blah blah blah. And then he asked who used to live in the basement. And at this point, my brother had moved out. That's very important. The ghost radar replied with my brother's full name, which no one ever calls him. We were shocked, so my uncle asked, how did you save him? And it replied with, awake. Huh? And then he asked, what did you save him from? And it said, gas. That's crazy. Needless to say, we were shocked. The last thing I'm going to talk about that happens in the house is my grandparents' friend's obituary, who passed away probably 15 years before. It will show up in their kitchen every month or so. They usually say hello to their friend and put the obituary back in the basement where it's supposed to stay. A little while later, it will show back up in the kitchen. I would tape that thing to something. I would tape it to the wall. I would turn that phone off, by the way, that Ouija board, like radar app. No way, that shouldn't be in the app store. That shouldn't be $1, no chance. And number 4, Ouija board troubles, all the way from Kentucky. This one is fresh off the press, posted not too long ago from username Totenkopf907. It started with my sister and a group of her friends playing with a Ouija board when we were younger. Classic start. My sister and her friends were between the ages of 10 and 12, and I just being 7. Okay, I'm the same age for my sister, so already I'm freaked out by the story. My grandmother told me that because I was the youngest and the most innocent of the group, something latched to me. Awesome, now I'm even more afraid. I have many stories to tell, but I'll tell some of the shorter stories unless you guys and girls are interested in hearing more. Yes, we'll definitely keep an eye on this user. My mom saw a black figure which looked like a person crawling on all fours with dislocated joints coming down the hallway wearing one of my Halloween masks, and when my mom turned to face it, it disappeared. She screamed my name thinking it was me trying to scare her and play tricks. But when she saw that I poked my head out of the day room, which was an added-on living room to the trailer, her face lost even more color. She had me go into my room and dig out a Halloween mask that was a skull-faced plate with horns around the top. She said the figure was wearing it and she wanted it out of the house. Fair, that makes sense. On 3 separate occasions, my grandmother had woken up to a little boy wearing an early 19th century sailor suit, and when she looked closer at him, she could see that his skin was pale and it was dark blue/black around his eyes and lips. Sounds like a ghost to me. Another time I was playing with my dog by throwing a blanket over my head and he would pull the blanket off. My dog started to whimper and cry before I could take the blanket off to see what was wrong, and I heard a deep raspy male's voice breathing heavily into my ear. That's horrible. My dog then proceeded to freak out and bark, even worse. These are the shorter stories that I have. The rest are long enough to make a movie and or thick chapter book. Make the book, man, or make the movie. I'll buy it. Audiobook, movie, short story, campfire stories. I'll listen to anything. I'm in. This sounds like a haunted house movie in the making. Let's go. Number 3, La Llorona. Remember the 2019 flick, The Curse of La Llorona? Sorry if I'm saying it wrong or kind of weird, but after this story, you might want to watch it again. This one comes to us from DJ Underdog 85. Cool name. This happened to me when I was about 11 years old. It was the 90s. I've lived my whole life in El Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One popular legend is the legend of the Weeping Woman, aka La Llorona, Spanish for the Weeping Woman. Okay, so the tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty and long flowing black hair. Nice. Wearing a white gown, she roams the rivers and creeks, wailing into the night and searching for children to drag, screaming to a watery grave. No one really knows where the weeping woman's story begins or where it came from, though the tales vary from source to source. The one common theme is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. No one really knows where the weeping woman's story begins or where it came from, though the tales vary from source to source. Now, the one common theme is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. Spooky. So one night, just like any other night, I lived in a trailer with my mom and dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night. So I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up, I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4 a.m. exactly, which illuminated from the stove in the kitchen. The TV was off, and normally I had a light on, but this time it was pitch black. So I woke up and heard a horrible screaming that was coming from far in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from my home, so I heard it and thought I was hearing things. So I asked myself, am I dreaming? And then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering, cats and dogs. The screaming was something I've never experienced ever before. It sounded like I was in a big hallway and a woman was screaming her guts out down that hallway. It echoed. And then in all the screaming, I started to make out words. The woman said, "Oh my children." So in a huge panic, I quickly got up from the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was asleep. I turned the closest light on and looked around. The screaming didn't stop. In fact, the screaming only got louder and closer. I questioned my sanity at this moment. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, nope, this is real. The animals are responding in a negative way. This is real life. So I did what any 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my mom and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming faded away as she woke up. Oh, that sucks. I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? So I told my mother, do you hear that screaming and crying lady? My mom was half asleep and she said, go back to sleep, it's most likely just your imagination. And I said, no, this is real, please just listen with your ears. You hear that? My mom quickly just said, you're dreaming, go back to sleep, it's gonna be okay. And by then the screaming had faded away, as if whatever was screaming knew that the adult was awake. I was terrified as well. I returned to the living room and quickly turned off the television and left most of the lights on as well. I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up, of course. I couldn't believe what I heard and witnessed. I was treated like a crazy person whenever I told my story. It got so bad that I kept my experience to myself. And to this day, I don't care what people think of my experience. I know what I heard, and a couple years later, it happened to me again. Okay, the movie was scary, let alone hearing about a story in real life. That's awful. And number 2, the Nebraska Haunting. This comes from Casey Ignis and it's making rounds online. When they were 16 years old, they started working at a Subway sandwich shop a few miles away from their house. I was in a fairly decent neighborhood with a fire station across the street. However, that didn't stop me from feeling uneasy when taking out the trash in the dark by myself at 10 p.m. Hey, I know the feeling. I worked at a retirement home and taking out the garbage was a challenge. There's a lot of stories, a lot of creepy stuff that happened there. I'll save that for another video. They continued to say that when they first started working there, everything was going great. I made a new friend, I was enjoying going to work. We were pretty short-staffed, so besides the 2 managers, it was just me and a coworker, Jackie. Being understaffed, Jackie opened the store and worked until 4 p.m. and I closed the store, working of course from 4 until 10:30. At first, nothing big happened. I always felt uneasy when I was alone, but nothing I couldn't ignore. And then small things started happening. The doorbell would go off when the door was shut and locked. On our shelf in the back, we had bags of sauce. Those would slide off the shelf and onto the floor, even when they were a foot away from the ledge. Things would randomly go missing. There was a door in the back that led outside where you could go and take a smoke break, and there would always be something or someone knocking on it. I would see small shadows out of the corner of my eyes all the time, especially at night around 9:30. And one night, my friend came to visit me at work, as they should. If I had a friend that worked at Subway, I would be there 4 times a week. We were standing there talking when all of a sudden she froze up and goes, "Do you hear that?" And right as I was about to tell her I didn't hear anything, this big gust of freezing air goes right in between us and we hear a growl come from the back. She got scared and left, but I had to stay an extra hour still with my shift. No way! She's like, I'm out of here. Good luck with your closing. Have fun with the Italian herbs and cheeses and ghosts. I'm out of here. See ya. So I was already freaked out, so I called the general manager's son and begged him to come close for me. He didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, so he was pretty annoyed when I called. But he ended up coming anyways. Clutch. When he got there, he came in through the back door. I told him what happened and he told me I was just hearing or seeing things, and then we walked to the front of the store. Right when we got there, he froze and was staring out the windows. The entire front of the store was covered in tiny child-sized handprints, all the way where nobody could even reach. I asked him if he finally believed me and he just nodded. I quit the next day. Yeah, I don't think that's a 2-week notice type of thing. I think you see the handprints and then you just grab your green apron and toss it and then you never look back. So I'm so sorry, Casey. Number 1, Folsen Prison Booze. This one's awesome and it comes to us from user Aberdo, posted about 8 months ago. I used to work in the prison that held Florida's death row at one point in my career, before transferring to a prison that was much closer to home. Due to the fact that I'm a female, they really didn't want me on the row unless it was for training. So during my training, I was given a tour of the row and the death chamber. That's a fun little tour. Our death chamber is comprised of 2 rooms. One holds our gurney for lethal injection and one holds our electric chair. I wasn't technically working on the row, but we did have an inmate who was on death watch, and there needed to be an officer in there with them 24/7. Death watch is where the inmate moved to the final holding cell until the execution, where they received their last meal and everything like that. An officer came to relieve me for a 15-minute break, and due to the size of this prison, I couldn't really walk out and have a smoke in time, so I decided to just explore a little bit on my break out of morbid curiosity. I walked into the room with the gurney and I saw it from the window, and I felt my heart sink knowing that the inmate that I was watching over would be strapped down to it just in a few hours' time. I ended up finding myself in the room with the chair, and when I did, something felt really off. I felt a mix of feelings: despair, anxiety. My mind was racing. I felt uneasy and I turned to leave the room when I heard, "You didn't think I would be back, huh?" I felt like I was in an Arctic tundra. I began to shiver. My spine was tingling. I was frozen in fear because I knew that I'd entered the chamber alone. I forced myself to turn back and I had my pepper spray in hand just in case I ran into an inmate that somehow escaped from the row. I did run into an inmate, but definitely not one that I was expecting to. I was staring dead into the face of Ted Bundy sitting in the chair that he died in. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, my heart was racing and I felt like I was gonna faint. I began backing away slowly. It was like he was alive, but he wasn't though, and the only way that I would have known that this was an apparition was because I knew that he'd been executed in the 80s. So still frozen in fear, I watched what happened to be an alive Ted Bundy disappear like he had never been there in the first place. So I got the hell out of there and was unable to speak to anybody the rest of the day. I don't blame you. I would sprint out of there. Also, of all the famous ghosts to see, Ted Bundy, really? Damn. What a bad gamble. Kicking off the list at number 5, we have the Gateway to Hell, also referred to as the Well to Hell. In 1989, a Russian science team had headed out to Siberia and they dug 9 miles down into the ground. Now that's quite deep. Now at one point the drill started to spin really fast, so they thought, okay, maybe we just hit a pocket in the Earth's crust. Cool, that happens, you know, naturally. There's pockets in the earth, you know, like blackheads in our face, it happens. They naturally felt all this heat rise up through the hole. So far this sounds like classic old Mother Earth. Yes, magma is hot, and usually when you dig 9 miles into the ground, you'll run into some. This is when things start to take a dark turn. The heat was actually way more brutal than they had predicted, around 2,000 degrees. That's pretty hot. So the next idea they had was to send a microphone down and see if they could record some activity. Maybe get a clue as to what's going on. Maybe it's a rave, who knows? Maybe it's a really hot rave. Upon closer inspection, they had heard sounds that resemble a large group of people screaming. What? Okay, so the mic only picked up 19 seconds of audio because it had, well, melted, of course. The audio was just haunting. Like, I remember hearing it not too long ago and it stuck with me. It sounds like one louder voice is yelling over like a bunch of others.
Warn you, what you are about to hear is very disturbing indeed.
Which is just impossible. Okay, now of course no one's going to be down that deep, and many argue that this is just tectonic plates moving against each other, which sounds like a decent explanation but definitely less fun. But this story is just too creepy to not include in our list. People all around the area were legit worried that they had just opened the gates to hell. Now with all these dark entities and demons now being free in the world. So what do you guys think? Backdoor to hell, or just Mother Earth telling us to, I don't know, smarten up and relax a bit? Take a listen and you be the judge. Number 4, the Blackbird of Chernobyl. So around 1986, the people around the power plant started having these wild sightings, described as, well, as you would guess, like a giant black bird with red eyes and large wings. Not your typical big bird that we're dealing with. Reports were flooding in more and more, and then later on in April 26, when reactor 4 had a nuclear meltdown, some people had even talked about how they saw this giant black bird on top of the reactor beforehand, like Batman, only horrible. Many of the workers that evacuated also reported sightings of this large beast, even mentioning that its wingspan was around 20 feet. Mine's like 7, maybe 6.5, I don't know. Theorists online also came to the conclusion that this is the same bird that had been spotted in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, before the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15th, 1968. So could this quite literally mean the omen of disaster, large black-winged creature? I mean, it checks out. The wardrobe seems rather fitting. Another really creepy plot here: before the events of both of these disasters, there were reports of creepy phone calls and even these crazy nightmares. Now, I know prank calls might be pretty common and nightmares are just another day in the park for some. Or maybe the Blackbird of Chernobyl is the one to blame. West Virginia's Mothman shares a similar look, so what do you guys think? Is this the same creature, or are these reports just sightings of the endangered black stork bird? Let us know in the comments down below. Number 3, the Ivan Vassili. Haunted Russian ghost ship, anyone? Here we go. Coming in next, we have the story of a haunted freighter. Whenever I read anything about haunted ships, it always leaves a chill going down my spine. I don't know. Since I saw Ghost Ship when I was younger, I just can't shake it. The story begins in 1897 when the ship was first built. It was built, of course, to transfer goods across the Baltic Sea to the Gulf of Finland. Now, the ship had enough coal to travel 2,500 miles, driven by its triple single expansion steam engine. Now, for the first 5 years of her travels, nothing crazy happened. It was built well. No muss, no fuss, you know? No problem. Then, in 1903, the Russian government was getting ready for war with Japan, so the cargo is a bit different now. Instead, it had now been carrying war materials. Not good, not a great omen. As the crew set sail across the Indian Ocean, they had noticed an eerie feeling was present with them on board. So much so that there are even sightings of this dark, mysterious entity that looked like a human, but with no features, like no face, and the scary qualities you never wish to see on someone, you know? And then later on, one of the crewmates woke up screaming, maybe from an awful nightmare, or so they thought. The screaming continued and continued until other men intervened, and eventually everybody was screaming, and now everyone's fighting each other. What the hell's going on? One of the men ended up jumping overboard to his death, and after that, they had obviously calmed down. They were super emotional over what had just happened, and of course very confused. Then it happened again a couple nights later. The same thing, with one man jumping overboard. They were convinced that whatever entity or presence they felt wanted them dead. So when the ship finally arrived to land, a few of them jumped out early and swam to shore the rest of the way. They were like, nah, we're out of here. That's how bad it got. The Russian government didn't believe this take, so they were ordered to return back to the boat. And the next destination was Hong Kong. The same type of incident happened again on this journey. Even once the ship had arrived in Hong Kong, the captain actually committed suicide while docked in the same way as others. He jumped off of the boat while it's in the port. It's crazy. For future trips, it was hard to find a group of sailors to agree to boarding the Ivan Vassili. I mean, you can't blame them. No chance I would get even close to the ship. I don't like boats in general, especially not boats that make you jump into the water. That is a hard pass. Number 2, UBV 76. We now go to a forest north of Moscow, where there is a mysterious sound coming from a shortwave radio station. Now we're talking about a shortwave radio station that has the nickname the Buzzer. You might have heard of it. So 25 times a minute for 24 hours a day, since the late 70s, you would hear this sound. It sounds like that. Kind of sounds like an old phone when it vibrates just on its last leg, you know? It's like, brrr. Well, this buzzing hasn't slowed down, and many people have tried to solve the mystery. So yeah, since 1973, this former Russian Soviet Union shortwave radio station has been broadcasting the same thing, except for the odd time when you'll hear a voice message that reads UBV 76, and then random names and numbers like UBV 76, and then 74, 27, 99, Boris, Roman, Olga, Anna, Larissa, just random names and numbers. These names are said every few months, and then once it's over, the buzzing resumes. See, nobody has quite figured out what it means. Some are convinced that it's a countermeasure for nuclear conflict. It's just a buzzing noise and it's creepy, right? Like, that's already by itself, I don't like this. Audio experts were able to figure out that the noise was being recorded by a microphone, like an actual mic. The sound was coming through. It wasn't like a predetermined sound that just clicks in every few seconds. Like, this is a live feed from a mic, because sometimes with these broadcasts you would hear conversations in the background. Like on November 3rd in 2001, part of a Russian conversation was heard. So many have come to the conclusion that the tone is coming from a tone wheel used in a Hammond organ. These voice messages were rare until around 2010, and then listeners reported more and more random voices. The buzzing is assumed to be there as a channel marker, you know, to keep the frequency occupied, and it's off time. The transmitter was located near Povarovo, Russia, about 10 kilometers northwest of Moscow, near the village of Lozki. Sorry if I'm saying those names wrong, by the way. The purpose behind the broadcast hasn't been confirmed by broadcast officials, but Rimantas Plekis, a former minister of the Communication and Informatics of the Republic of Lithuania, states that the voice messages are to confirm that the operators at receiving stations are alert. I mean, that's a pretty cool way of checking in. Just spitting some names and codes and then bam, back to work. Or maybe there's a bigger conspiracy afoot. Maybe there's some secret Russian operation like we saw in Stranger Things. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Black Volga. Okay, we got haunted ships, we got haunted broadcasts, but what about some secrets behind a black car? The Black Volga legend began around 1960 to 1970. This fancy limousine that would supposedly take children from right off of the streets. The nation at this point was living in fear of the Cold War, so this wasn't taken lightly. Reports would say that there were no driver in the Black Volga, and this is way before Tesla and autopilot, so don't even think about that. However, some have gone so far as to say that Lucifer himself was operating the car behind the wheel, which is wild. What a crazy Uber that would be. That or crazed nuns. So if you were to claim that the Volga wasn't involved in any of these children's disappearances, you would be dead within 24 hours. So if you think about talking about it right now to the person next to you, better off just keeping it to yourself. Better be safe than sorry, guys. Some iterations of this story have the car as red, but it's most commonly cited as an all-black GAZ-21 Volga with white wheel rims and white curtains. The story also has something to do with Lavrenity Baraya, who was driven around slowly around the streets of Moscow in an armored Packard limousine. He would then point out young women to be taken back to his mansion. Just an awful garbage human being. The young women were kidnapped apparently so their blood can be used as a cure for leukemia, while others believed it was organ theft by the KGB. One of the creepiest versions of this tale have to be from the late 20th century, when the Black Volga car is sometimes spotted with license plate 666, which is just a great number. And then when the car would approach passerbyers in the street, the driver would inform them saying they have 24 hours to live, with the words being, "Tomorrow you will die at this hour." I mean, at least they're giving a heads up, right? Gives you time to kind of get your affairs in order, maybe slam some laundry, text a few friends, I don't know. If any car approaches you, be super cautious, but if it's a Black Volga with Satan in the driver's seat, just start running.
Coming in at number 5, A Deadly Exorcism. Back in August of 2016, Kennedy Ive, a 26-year-old man, died during an apparent 3-day exorcism at a home in North America. It is said that during that same month, Kennedy began acting very strangely and aggressive following a pain in his throat. According to reports, Kennedy bit his father and even threatened to cut off his own you-know-what, and even stated that there was a snake living inside of his body. Very creepy. His family had a very strange reaction to his outbursts. Instead of seeking professional help, or medical help for that matter, they restrained him to a bed with cable ties, and they did this because they believed he was possessed by evil spirits, so they set out to cure him. They did this through prayer and restraint over the course of 3 days, with Kennedy's brother Colin stating, I quote, "It's clear that thing was in him. What we believed was a demon because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him. We had to restrain him for himself. It was clear if we didn't restrain him, he would have tried to harm people in our family." Now, the brother only called emergency services after the 3 days when Kennedy began complaining of dehydration, with him also suffering from breathing issues. He was later pronounced dead. All 7 family members involved in the exorcism were found not guilty of manslaughter, which is absolutely insane to me. In at number 4, we have the haunted doll. Now, this isn't quite like the case of Robert the Doll or Annabelle or even Chucky in Child's Play. This is something much stranger, in my opinion that is, because when you think of haunted dolls, you often think of those I just mentioned, or perhaps even old Victorian dolls. You wouldn't necessarily think of Elsa from Frozen. Nope. Now, the doll was gifted to a young girl in Houston back in 2013, but despite never having its batteries changed, the doll continued to function for 6 years. It would speak and giggle unprompted. Even when it was switched off, it would continue to speak in both English and Spanish. So like any sane family would do, they decided to throw the doll away. However, just a few weeks later, the doll reappeared inside a bench in their living room. So this time, they double-bagged the doll doll and placed it at the bottom of the garbage. However, once again, the doll reappeared outside of their home. In order to get distance from this possessed doll, the family sent it to their friend in Minnesota, who gladly took it. It now lives on the front of his Jeep. I quote, "If anything weird happens, I'm welding her into a steel pipe and sinking it in the lake of the woods." In at number 3 we have The Watcher. Now this story is every new homeowner's worst nightmare. Imagine buying your dream home only to receive terrifying messages from a stranger letting you know that they are watching you, among other things. After moving into their $1.3 million dream home, Derek and his wife Maria began receiving odd messages, beginning with one that simply read, I quote, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." Nothing untoward there, but it spelled the beginning of something much more sinister. As David kept reading the letter, things took a turn. I quote, "How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I've been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out." Yes, that is incredibly terrifying. The Watcher began sending letters detailing what the homeowners were up to, documenting movements of construction workers at the home, and more. Derek and Maria also had children, with one letter from the Watcher stating, I quote, "Have they found out what's in the walls yet? And I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me." The family ultimately fled the house and filed a lawsuit against the previous owners, as you would. In at number 2 we have the Death of Elisa Lam. We've discussed the story of Elisa Lam a number of times on our channel, but hers is such a tragic and terrifying tale that we can't possibly leave it off our list, especially considering how baffling it is. Elisa Lam was a Canadian student who attended the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. However, in 2013 she took an Amtrak and intercity bus by herself and went to California, arriving in LA on January 26, 2013. During this time she checked into the Cecil Hotel near the infamous Skid Row in downtown LA. Now this is where things get interesting. Lam was originally assigned a shared room with someone, however her roommate complained to the hotel about odd behaviour, so Lam was moved to a room on her own. Now Lam was first reported missing by her parents on January 31st, 2013, the day she was scheduled to check out of the Cecil Hotel, so the LAPD began their search. The police searched room to room but found nothing. After a week with no sign of Lam, the LAPD released elevator footage of the last known sighting of her, with the video drawing worldwide attention. In the video, Lam is acting very strange, entering and exiting an elevator repeatedly, hitting all the buttons and acting in a very paranoid manner, almost as though she thought someone was coming to get her. Theories quickly began to surface on the internet as to what might be going on, with some saying she was escaping someone, while others claimed she was under the influence of drugs. However, the latter theory was debunked upon the discovery of her body. During this time, guests at the hotel began to complain about low water pressure and an unusual taste. This prompted a search in the water tank atop the hotel. This is where Lam's body was found. She was discovered floating naked, with her clothing floating next to her. There was no evidence of trauma, with toxicology reports showing no traces of drugs. What happened to Lam has never truly been known, with LAPD still claiming accidental drowning, but many don't believe that. And finally, in at number 1 we have the Axe Murder House. Between the evenings of June 9th, 1912 and the early morning of June 10th, 1912, the Villisca axe murders occurred in the town of Villisca, Iowa, in the United States. This is a crime that to this day remains unsolved, with no one being tried for the crimes. Now on those days, 6 members of the Moore family as well as 2 house guests were murdered in an incredibly grisly manner inside of the Moore residence. All victims suffered head wounds from an axe. Upon investigation, 2 spent cigarettes were discovered, suggesting that the killer or killers were hiding out in the attic, waiting for the family to go to sleep before descending into the home and killing the residents. Now, over time, there were many people of interest that the police investigated, including Reverend George Kelly, Frank F. Jones, William Mansfield, and Henry Lee Moore. George Kelly ended up being tried twice for the crimes. The first ended in a hung jury, and the second time the trial ended in an acquittal. All other suspects were exonerated. Now, the site of the murders has since become a popular tourist attraction, with ghost hunters and horror lovers flocking to the home, where you can now pay to stay. It costs roughly $400 a night to stay at the old haunted house, where some visitors have reported paranormal occurrences, including visions of a man with an axe roaming around the home, or even distant screams of children. However, things took a sinister turn for Robert Stephen Lawson Jr., a regular paranormal hunter who visited the home with some friends. However, in 2014 he was found inside of the home stabbed in the chest, a self-inflicted wound, according to reports. He ended up recovering from the injuries but has never spoken publicly about what occurred. Coming in at number 5 we have USS Cyclops. The USS Cyclops was the US Navy's biggest ship, so how could it possibly vanish without a trace? Well, this question has been on the lips of many since March of 1918, which was when the enormous vessel disappeared while on a voyage between the West Indies to Baltimore. The vessel was around 550 feet long, with a crew of around 306 and around 11,000 tons of manganese aboard. In March 1918, the USS Cyclops left Brazil, voyaged to Barbados to resupply, before heading on the long journey home to Baltimore. However, the journey was never completed, with something going awry, and the large vessel never being seen or heard from again. Creepy stuff. It vanished without even an SOS. The last recorded message from the USS Cyclops simply said, I quote, "Weather fair. All well." All was definitely not well though. Now, just like the upcoming stories on our list, there is no definitive end. The disappearance remains unsolved, with investigators being absolutely stumped as to what might have happened. There have, however, been numerous theories surrounding the disappearance, with many theorizing that the USS Cyclops vanished in the Bermuda Triangle. What that means, we do not know. Some think it's a giant whirlpool that sucks you down into the depths of hell. And by some, I mean me. It seems plausible. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps us out a lot in the YouTube algorithm and pushes out videos. So if you like us and want to support us, give it a thumbs up. Coming in at number 4, we have Witchcraft. Back in December of 1967, a cruiser named Witchcraft sailed from Miami with her captain Dan Barak and his friend Father Patrick Horgan. The Witchcraft was a 23-foot yacht, with the two men sailing it to get a good view of Miami's Christmas lights. How sweet. However, around a mile from shore, the Coast Guard received a call from the captain stating that they had hit something, but the damage was not substantial. They were to be towed to shore though, with the Coast Guard heading their way, expected to reach the vessel in around 19 minutes. However, once the Coast Guard arrived in the area where the distress call was received, the area was found to be completely deserted, with no sign of any ship having been stranded there. Now, many may speculate that perhaps it sank. In 19 minutes, I don't think so. Plus, the yacht in which the men were on was supposed to be virtually unsinkable. Not to mention, aboard the boat were life jackets, life rafts, and various other life-saving devices. However, none of these items seemed to have been used, and the boat was completely gone. Coast Guard searched hundreds of square feet for the yacht, but nothing was ever found, with speculation and word of mouth being all that remains. Coming in at number 3, we have Carroll A Deering. Carroll A Deering was a commercial schooner and is perhaps the most written about maritime mysteries of the 20th century. Back on January 31st, 1921, Carroll A Deering was discovered around the rocks of Hatteras Diamond Shoals in North Carolina, with many speculating that the vessel was involved in rum running. However, when investigators boarded the ship, they discovered the vessel to be completely deserted. All the crew members were gone, along with all of their belongings. Equipment, logbooks, and even the life rafts were missing. The ship has since been dubbed the Ghost Ship of the Outer Banks, with it disappearing during the same time as many other vessels in the Bermuda Triangle area. With so many vessels disappearing or being discovered in the Bermuda Triangle area, you would think there would be information or at least some evidence that exists in the mysterious waters. However, we are no closer to solving any of these mysteries. The Bermuda Triangle certainly holds all of the answers, but the cost you must pay to get those answers seems to be life-threatening. Would you dare go there? If you want to die. Coming in at number 2, we have Mary Celeste. Mary Celeste may very well be one of the most famous stories on our entire list. with the tale of its shipwreck going down in history. On December 5th, all the way back in 1872, the Mary Celeste was discovered adrift in choppy waters. This was surprising, as Mary Celeste had left New York City 8 days prior and should have already arrived in Italy, yet it never did. Now, the boat that discovered the Mary Celeste investigated, boarding the ship and searching the quarters. No one was aboard and nothing was out of place. The only thing missing was the one and only lifeboat. Food, water and alcohol was all on board still, but not a person in sight. No trace of the people aboard the Mary Celeste, or even the missing lifeboat for that matter, have ever been found. Now, many theories were thrown around, including pirates. That's right, many thought pirates boarded the ship, took the crew and left the vessel floating in the waters. However, that possibility was quickly ruled out, considering nothing was taken from the ship and valuables were still intact. Other theories surrounding the Mary Celeste included criminal conspiracy, alien abduction, as well as an attack by a giant squid, the latter being absolutely insane, but personally my favourite. Others have theorised a natural disaster, but most have credited it to the Bermuda Triangle. Why else would a crew just mysteriously disappear? And finally, in at number 1 we have the cursed ship. Now, this story is utterly baffling, just as the previous ones have been, but this one has left many dumbfounded as to what actually happened. In 1810, a 210-foot long schooner named Ellen Austin was sailing from New York to London when it began to head towards the Bermuda Triangle. It was in the general vicinity of the triangle that Ellen Austin stumbled upon a vessel moving aimlessly across the waters. When Ellen Austin approached and the crew boarded the unknown vessel, they found no one aboard. However, it appeared to still be seaworthy. The baffling thing about the unmanned vessel was that there appeared to be no signs of trouble. Everything was in order, including food, personal belongings, and even alcohol. The only things missing were the captain's logbook and the nameplate of the ship. The captain of Ellen Austin ordered the salvage crew to guide the ship back home. However, after 2 days, the ships got separated by a nasty storm, but once it settled, the unnamed ship was nowhere to be seen. A few days after the storm, however, the captain observed the vessel from a lookout, only to realise that the vessel appeared to be drifting aimlessly. Once again, just like when they initially discovered it. After hours of sailing, Ellen Austin caught up to the vessel, only to discover that no one was on board and the salvage crew were gone. Very creepy indeed. There seems to be no explanation for this other than the Bermuda Triangle being some sort of cause, or perhaps even a curse that was placed on the unnamed vessel. What are your thoughts exactly though? Let me know down below.